The Cities and the City. Empress Vakula sadly passed over 200 years ago. I know there are people who want her to come back. Jemima was not expecting to be interrupted. "It's not about wanting her to come back," said one of the younger wise ones hotly. "The sovereigns are rising in Varushka, and if she is a sovereign, then that might mean she is rising too." "Please, listen to me. The Empress died. She will come back in time. Most likely she has already come back. But not as some strange monster of the cursed hills and dark woods. As a human being, reborn after her time in the labyrinth, assuming that her virtue in life did not allow her to transcend and become a paragon, and we just haven't realized it yet." One of the wise ones crossed their arms, while another adjusted his shawl. The third was having none of it. "We are here from Varushka, because while you know a lot about tending tombs, we are the people who know about sovereigns and the terrible powers they wield, and we are telling you we must be allowed into the tomb." The steward crossed her own arms. She made eye contact briefly with Temovich. She knew the old woman very mildly, having shared the occasional coffee and pastry with them in the park near the tomb. The wise one shrugged her eyebrows apologetically at her companion's rash words. But her serious expression did not falter. "I know you're concerned." Jemima was keeping her temper by remembering that these people were simply being vigilant. They had identified a possible threat and were investigating, and she could not fault them for that, even if they were wrong. "But you cannot enter the tomb of the Empress, not least because there are few things more commonly associated with a sudden haunting than defilement of the resting place, especially after all this time." "I am telling you, no, I am telling you." The steward of the dead had had enough. "You are not going into the tomb today or any other day. There is no sign whatsoever that anything untoward is happening here. Your worries are your own business until such a time as you can bring me anything other than unformed conjecture to suggest that the risks of not doing so outweigh the incredible disrespect you would be causing to the Empress. There is nothing more to be said." He opened his mouth to say something more, but she turned away. He sputtered a little, and she heard Temovich and the man in the shawl talking quietly and soothingly to him. "Excuse me," said a new voice. She turned slightly to find 3 orcs hovering a little nervously at the bottom of the steps. They were Imperial orcs of the Sunstorm Sept, here with the winter sun by their dress. I'm sorry, yes, can I help you?" They exchanged glances, and their spokesman gave her a worried smile. "We were wondering if we might be able to get into the tomb," he said. "We've reason to believe there's a lost item of worth in there, and we would like to reclaim it for the people of Skarsind, or the people of Highgard, or possibly the people of Varushka, depending on what it is." Jemima started to count to 10 inside her head, and took a deep breath. Overview. The League is not the only nation with cities. The White City and the Black were old when Sarvos and the rest were open fields. Many of the concerns of city folk are the same the world over, and this season highlights those similarities. Malevolent heralds, worries about dark powers, the quest for items of worth, concern about what one's neighbours are doing. There is a commonality between the Highborn and their siblings in the League. Nor are Imperial citizens the only builders, of course. People everywhere of all kinds are drawn together like filings to a magnet. Even the Druge, it seems, build communities, if the tales of the sprawling chaos that is the city of Lean are to be believed. The valiant Pegasus fights in the salt flats of Sanaf and urges the soldiers of Highgard and their allies to remember that, though they walk the road through the heartlands of the Malum, they are here as liberators, not conquerors. Necropolis. Worth. Following the summer solstice, the Imperial Orcs of the Winter Sun march south from the Barrens to Necropolis. They are here to rest, and to ready for the coming war with the Grendel. Yet that is not their only reason for being here. A unique enchantment of day magic has been laid upon them, designed to focus and augment the effects of Bright Eyes Gleam in the Depths. It allows scouts and soldiers associated with the Orc army to seek out lost items of worth, and urges the soldiers to encourage other Imperial Orcs in the area to recall the presence of lost items of their own. It empowers them to find things thought lost to the nation through misadventure, death in battle, or even things they themselves did not lose but an ancestor might have had. The power seems to function at least in part thanks to the last lingering power of the astronomantic conjunction of the lock and the web. Almost immediately it becomes clear that the majority of the items of worth in Necropolis either belong to the Highborn, or are interred in the tombs of the Black City and belong to the dead. The ritual does not differentiate between items that might have had worth for the orcs. It seems to draw attention to any object that has a long history, and in Necropolis this is a truly astonishing number of items. This makes some sense to Imperial orcs and Highborn magicians alike. The magic of the Day Realm is unlikely to be able to discern the numinous quality of worth, but in conjunction with the Imperial enchantment and the conjunction, could help identify items whose history hangs heavy around them and could be read, much as the Detect Magic spell does. There are also few Imperial orcs in the territory to encourage to find items of their own, only a few dozen pilgrims visiting the tomb of Emperor Araz, or the more recent memorials for Imperial orc heroes interred alongside the other champions of the Empire. The Stewards of the Dead answer questions and listen with a great deal of interest to stories of worth and what it means to the Imperial orcs. For many of them, this is the first time they have had an opportunity to learn about the concept, and many are fascinated, especially when talk turns to matters of the Imperial relics, the weapons and armour donated to the First Legions by the Highborn. They won't provide access to burial places, however, and in all honesty, few Imperial orcs even ask. The idea of grave robbing to recover items of worth proves unpalatable. This isn't to say the magic is wasted, not entirely. There are people in Highguard who have the kind of items of worth that would be valuable to the Imperial orcs. A few are relics of the shameful past, reminders of the centuries that Highguard saw orcs purely as creatures to be slain or enslaved. When an orc requests the return of such items, few refuse. The inspiring words of Olivar of Estus Sanctum are still plain in the Highborn people's minds. There are also several items that have a less sorrowful history, gifts given to battlefield allies by dying Imperial orc soldiers. Most of these are kept as mementos by the Highborn to whom they were entrusted, a reminder of a staunch ally or friend. But in some cases, they too are surrendered to the Imperial orcs, especially when the meaning of worth is explained. In each case, they are handed over with stories of how and why they came into the possession of the Highborn, further cementing their identity as items of worth. Some of these items are given to General Rykana, but most are either kept by the soldiers who find them, eager to help build their legend and that of the object. Many are also sent back to Scarsind, to the Halls of Worth, so the Oathrights can find new champions to carry them and be inspired by them. Necropolis Vakula. The Imperial orcs are not the only people interested in relics and tombs in Necropolis. During the summer solstice, the Varushkan National Assembly upheld a statement of principle by Father Drakov that expressed the concerns of the Imperial Necromancer that Empress Vakula might somehow have risen as a sovereign. A small delegation of wise ones in Necropolis, some resident and some making the long trip south especially, speak with the Stewards of the Dead and the Guardians of the Tomb. There is absolutely no evidence of anything untoward around the tomb. It is as sealed as it ever was, and since the mild disturbances in spring 382, there has been nothing else to raise any concern among the stewards. Requests to break open the tomb are met with polite refusal. The idea that an imperial empress might turn out to be some kind of awful unliving horror akin to the Charnel Lord or Dwala is viewed by several of the stewards as quite offensive. Furthermore, even if for some reason a malevolent entity were to arise in the tomb, there are precautions to provide warnings of such an event. Without significant evidence that some serious threat resides inside the tomb, the stewards absolutely have no interest in allowing anyone to disturb the rest of the throne interred within. They thank the wise ones for their concern, but reassure them that if anything does happen at the tomb, they will be the first to seek out the expertise of their Varushkan siblings in addressing that threat. Necropolis. Espionage. The vigilance of the Seventh Wave has been rewarded by the revelation of an espionage ring in Necropolis. The Highborn National Assembly sent Isaac of the Silent Tide to support the army in rooting out the spies with as little disruption as possible. The power of the Imperial enchantment currently infusing the Empire provides subtle assistance as well, particularly when it comes to uncovering hidden evidence or securing documents the spies might rather see destroyed. It becomes clear that there are precious few Highborn who have intentionally sold secrets to the Grendel. Most of those who have provided information to the barbarians are doing so unwittingly or without due consideration of the consequences. With Isaac urging people to consider the behavior of their friends and enemies, and the assurance that those who have misstepped will not be punished, and the Vigilant Unconquered following up the leads they uncovered last season, the espionage ring is rolled up. The Grendel involved are ejected from Highguard, and the magistrates work with the Highborn to differentiate those who have committed treason from those who have made mistakes. Although it does put an end to the trade agreements between Highborn merchants and Grendel originally endorsed by the Assembly. Highborn businesses no longer receive additional trade. In the process of rolling up the espionage ring in Necropolis, there are several opportunities to actually capture information that might prove of use. The most obvious thing discovered by soldiers and priests is that the Grendel spy masters are apparently in turmoil. None of them saw the betrayal of the Upulian orcs coming. The Council of the Salt Lords must now face the fact that one of their own has defected to the Imperial side, someone who was privy to many of their plans for the coming war with the Empire. They are now having to change those plans. Or not. According to some of the documents recovered before the Grendel spies could destroy them, some of the Salt Lords are arguing that changing the plan is exactly what the Empire would expect, that the attack on Sarvos should go ahead as planned and catch Imperial armies by surprise. In the end, it is clear that they have not yet made up their mind what they are going to do. An attack is coming, but the Council of Salt Lords have not yet chosen a target. There's also some disturbing notes that talk about an agreement with the Asavean Plenum. It's an open secret that the Asaveans are offering support to the Grendel in their upcoming war with the Empire. And equally an open secret that the Plenum wants revenge for the raid on Chaloncio. The Asaveans are demanding the destruction of an imperial city as the only way to regain their pride and propitiate their bitter gods. The most likely targets are Sarvos, obviously, but also Serdok. And there are plenty of hints in the recovered documents that the Grendel would prefer to sacrifice Serdok to the Asaveans' bloodlust and take Sarvos for themselves. But if push comes to shove and their alliance is on the line, who knows which way the Grendel will jump. The majority of the intelligence recovered, however, hints at the Grendel plans for Necropolis. They have been mapping military targets and defensible locations. They definitely have a map of the territory that could be used for scrying, and know the details of any army that has been stationed here in the last 3 years up until the start of the autumn equinox. The main target of any attack on the territory, however, will be Necropolis itself. The Grendel are itching to despoil the tombs of the dead thrones and the heroes of the Empire, and the general consensus is that such an attack would be a serious blow against the morale of not only of Highguard, but of the Empire as a whole. Raiding most likely wouldn't be sufficient. A Grendel army would need to occupy the region of Korsmouth to have the time and access needed to break into the tombs. If they did, they would potentially leave the city ruined, hundreds of memorials defaced, grave goods stolen, and at least some of the bodies taken away. There's still no explanation as to what the Grendel wanted with the body of Empress Gazelle, for example. While the League were able to move her corpse far north, and inter her in the garish new tomb in Temeshwar, there is no chance whatsoever that the other tombs of the thrones could be relocated, never mind the mausoleums, cenotaphs, and memorials inhabited by the Empire's heroes. The Grendel spies have identified that if they want to raid the Necropolis, they will need to take and hold either Sanctuary Sands or Naris in Redoubt. Obviously, Rumour's Rest protects Sanctuary Sands, so it will be no easy task. The Grendel must also be aware that an Imperial counterattack against a weak holding in one of these regions might leave their army trapped in Korsmouth, although that will be scant comfort to the people of Necropolis or the Empire. A second ring. While the major focus of the 7th Wave is on the Grendel spies, there is another ring at work in Necropolis, it seems. During the summer solstice, heroes from Anvil apparently used the Sentinel Gate to investigate a well-secured smuggling ring operating out of Crown's Quay. A group of freeborn corsairs, acting on behalf of a Madrugan magistrate, apparently identified a pivotal Grendel smuggler and their Imperial accomplices, and provided a thorough package of evidence, which was used not only to arrest the smugglers in Necropolis, but also to deal with several agents in Serdok. The Grendel necropolis was further implicated in a fire at a local tavern, and, if not for the quick thinking of a second group of Imperial heroes, several historic dockside buildings might have been gutted. With the aid of the 7th Wave, there's no doubt that the smugglers have been dealt with, but there is still a matter of mild concern. Along with traditional small items that could be moved easily, the Grendel were also selling shipments of an Asavean narcotic called Ocean's Caress into the Empire. The substance itself is not illegal, but bringing it into the Empire without paying the appropriate tariffs, which is not insignificant when they involve trade with slavers such as the Grendel and the Asaveans, certainly is. People are being urged to be on the lookout for the substance, a thick blue liquid that causes feelings of relaxation and peculiar dreams. And if they have any suspicion that it has been brought into the Empire illegally, report these suspicions to a magistrate. By all accounts, concerns about this particular narcotic have also been raised by Esker Crowspeaker, the Voice of Liberty, although at this time, the greater majority of the General Assembly were not moved to support the judgment. Sarvos. Agents. Where there is one espionage ring, there are likely others. The Shuttered Lantern, with the support of the Imperial Conclave, have set themselves the task of tracking down espionage agents in the city of Sarvos. Again supported by the Imperial Enchantment, they are able to carefully track down a number of individuals who have connections with Grendel, observe them, and begin to get a feel for the Orcs' operations in the territory. They are also helped by the fact the Wolves of War are resting and recuperating in the city. Members of the Shuttered Lantern work with soldiers from the army, taking advantage of their knowledge of the city and the surrounding terrain, their military experience, and their willingness to work with others, especially if there is money on the table. There is, indeed, an espionage ring at work here, but there's no sign it is connected to the one in Necropolis, or organised in the same way. It seems the Grendel spymasters are maintaining separation between their various operations, meaning that even if one is identified and rolled up, the others will not be compromised. What they are able to do, however, is confirm that there are definitely espionage rings in Madruga, Redoubt, Desato, and Spiral. The theoretical is now certain. Much as with the Necropolis espionage ring, however, the majority of the agents here are human rather than orcs. Most of the agents are League citizens providing what seems to them to be slightly dubious or criminal information in return for coin. The Grendel are not barbarians after all, and until recently, there were plenty of people who assumed the peace treaty would continue for years to come. Not every agent is an Imperial, however. A key piece of intelligence gathered by the Shuttered Lantern comes when an Apulian Orc identifies an apparent Bravo on the docks, who they recognize as Vorlach, as a vassal of Salt Lord Morvain. They were carousing with off-duty soldiers from the Wolves of War, wheedling their way into their confidence by spending coin freely to buy drink and drugs. This leads to a group of other humans who, while pretending to be Sarvosans, are actually disguised agents of the Salt Lords. By the autumn equinox, the Shuttered Lantern has a rough map of the web of agents in Boche, Signo, and Ucheleni. This presents an obvious problem. The best way to deal with the espionage ring would be to move against agents in each of the 3 regions simultaneously, but that might prove a challenge for the Shuttered Lantern alone. Lanterns. The Grandmaster of the Shuttered Lantern could use a declaration of concord to ask the Conclave to support them in dealing with the espionage ring in Sarvos themselves. This would require a commitment of mana. The magicians in Sarvos estimate it will take 60 crystal mana in addition to their own resources. It will not be necessary to do a separate endowment. The resources will come directly from the font for Winter Solstice, providing the Conclave supports the Shuttered Lantern's operations. If they take the lead, the Shuttered Lantern will roll up the espionage ring in Sarvos before the Winter Solstice. The Grandmaster will receive some information about what the espionage network was working on, along with a portion of the wealth the Grendel were using to pay their informants, and a single magic item taken from the spies. Some of the agents may escape. Coordinating the operation will be extremely challenging, but the threat will be removed. Wolves. The Wolves of War are on furlough in Sarvos as the Shuttered Lantern operation unrolls. League magicians from the Order are able to call on friends who serve in the army for additional aid, and that means that a number of competent soldiers and officers have inside information about the espionage ring as well. As such, the Wolves of War could clean house in the League territory themselves. The general would need to remain in Sarvos and use their mercenary connections to take the Guard the Gates order. If they do so, whatever else happens, the espionage ring will be shattered, multiple agents arrested and interrogated, and some of their accumulated wealth will be seized and delivered to the general, along with additional information about what the network was working on. The army has the capacity to ensure that very few agents will be able to slip through the net, and the threat of agents operating in Savos will be removed. Obviously, the Shattered Lantern and the Wolves of War might cooperate to smash the espionage ring together. If they do so, they will complement each other's approaches wherever possible. Both the Grandmaster and the General will receive a portion of the wealth the Grendel agents have accumulated. Both will receive information about what the network was working on. The espionage ring will be absolutely devastated. Nobody will escape. Of course, there's no requirement for anyone to do anything here. The Shattered Lantern may want to move on to start locating the Grendel agents in other territories. The Wolves of War might wish to do the same, or have obligations that make it impossible to focus on cleaning up spies in Savos. Either the Order or the army can come back at a later date and deal with the espionage ring, as long as nothing major changes in the meantime. Leaving the ring in place is somewhat risky, however. While the espionage ring is primarily used for information gathering, it is sophisticated enough and well hidden enough that it could take covert action in support of any Grendel attack here that would go beyond just gathering information. Bastion, the Grand Endeavour. Work is ready to begin on the sacred city to be built in Bastion. The challenge of finding a piece of suitably numinous art that can help the architects and engineers of the Empire build something that will echo down the ages has been completed. The contest of imagination has ended. The Assembly of Nine selected 2 winners. One, by the marcher Millward Cowley, is a truly ambitious piece that lays out the basic design of the city, a central cathedral, and 7 encircling temples, each dedicated to one of the 7 virtues, surrounded by gardens. The other is from the Imperial Orc Skywise Gralka, a gorgeous piece of conceptual art capturing the idea of soaring towers and pealing bells. These 2 pieces of art have been used to draw up the awe-inspiring structure that now begins to rise in Bastion. Assuming that everything goes according to plan, and sufficient resources are available each season, it should be completed shortly before the Autumn Equinox 388. When Elian Sweetwater proposed that Imperial artists work with the Assembly of Nine to find a suitable inspiration, members of the Pharos Water chapter proposed that a competition was the only virtuous way to choose those designs. The chapter's benefactors committed to providing the winning artist with the Wayfarer's Guide, an artifact dragonbone symbol originally created for Emperor James, but never delivered. The Assembly of Nine, however, has chosen 2 victors in the contest. The Exarch of the Pharaoh's Water chapter cannot break the Wayfarer's Guide in half, and committed to provide a single gift to one winning artist. As such, they propose to leave the decision as to who receives the Emperor Frederick's dragonbone symbol to Millward and Gralka. The talisman will be delivered to the Tribune of the Synod on Saturday morning. They ask that Gralka and Millward bring their decision as to who will receive the item to them at the hub when they are ready. The project requires 1,000 white granite and 250 thrones. So far, 3 nations have committed their support. Eli of the Cenotaph urged the Highborn to offer whatever they could to make this dream a reality. Friar John of the Morn urged the people of the Marches to contribute whatever they could, while the Freeborn and Sufyani Isuri Erigo did the same for their own nation. Between them, the 3 nations are contributing 53 wains of granite and 106 crowns each season. Highguard will continue to do so until the project is complete, while the Marches and Brass Coast will do so until the start of the Summer Solstice 386. Such devotion is costly. Everything these nations can spare will be devoted to support the extraordinary project. There will be no resources available for other plans. As a result, it will be impossible to use a mandate to urge the people of the nation to support any commission or similar project that needed help. Any mandate in the Imperial Synod that urged citizens to provide financial support to a different commission or cause would fail to have any effect, and any statement of principle that asked the nation for their support in this way would fail to produce a mandate. Other nations may still choose to offer their support. Unlike normal mandates, those urging people to support the ambitious endeavour can be proposed at any time unless the situation changes. Even the League could do so, in spite of their National Assembly previously having supported a statement by Fabio Costas de Savos denouncing the entire scheme as unvirtuous, as they chose not to raise the resultant mandate. There is one major cause for concern in Bastion. The forces of the destructive eternal Cold Sun have gathered in Bastion. These wicked heralds have already destroyed the Unbound Steel Hall of Lost Chapters in Rykos, and assaulted a number of targets in Highguard, including the Physician's Hall in Sibella. Most worrying of all, however, is the news that a major force of these heralds is gathered at Woodbury, a force of some 3,000 supernatural entities with barely understood powers. There is a great deal of white granite being gathered at Bastion, and the construction work leaves many workers, architects, engineers, and the people of the White City itself vulnerable. The attackers would need to pass through Stoneside to threaten the city directly, but they could certainly raid the caravans bringing white granite from the Western nations. Worse, they have demonstrated both a committed hatred of things that exalt the spirit, and an ability to put themselves in a position to try and destroy those things. Finally, of course, there are no fortifications in Bastion whose garrison might slow them down. The people of the White City are nervous, to put it mildly. But nowhere near as nervous as the people of Woodbury. Unlike the chapters of the northern and eastern regions, those of Bastion, and those of Woodbury in particular, tend to be less fortified and more concerned with agriculture and the virtue of prosperity. They have no capacity to protect themselves from the trepidations of Cold Sun, and if they are forced to flee, they will also be forced to leave their harvest behind, along with many of their treasures. While folk in Bastion are concerned about what is going to happen with Cold Sun, the chapters of Woodbury are beside themselves with worry. Lean. A road to liberation. Only one highborn army is actively engaged with a military campaign this season. The valiant Pegasus, who are part of the Imperial advance into the Salt Flats of Senath. It is a courageous attack on the Druge heartlands that draws the full attention of the Imperial Synod due to the crusading nature of Highguard's armies. Some question the wisdom of such a headlong plunge into enemy territory without any idea of what is there, but others point to the presence of the Citadel Guard and their unique ability to carry out enlightened scrying in a territory. But if more knowledge is what is required, why don't the assemblies help the generals gather it? As a result of the inspirational attack by the valiant Pegasus last season, any of the 4 national assemblies whose armies are present in Senath could choose to encourage their soldiers to reach out to the local orcs with a mandate. If this mandate is enacted by a nation, then the soldiers of that army would adopt the approach pioneered by the Dornish in the conquest of the Barrens, striving to minimize casualties and thus open channels of communication. Each army that is affected would suffer a 25% penalty to territory captured, but they would gain information about a single sept present in the territory, get an impression of how they view the Empire, and gain a wing messenger contact for that sept. Each assembly can only influence the soldiers of their own nation who were present there last season. Armies that were not present in the Senath before the summit cannot be affected. None of these mandates will have any effect if the Iron Helms, or any other Imperial army, carry out a merciless assault against the Druge inhabitants of the Salt Flats of Senath in this coming season. It is not possible to open diplomatic channels of communication while engaging in brutal tactics designed to terrorize them. If any army undertakes a merciless assault, then all the mandates will automatically fail.